Student Leadership Program's Knowledge Community Open Meeting, which includes the SLPKC Think Tank and Awards Ceremony. We are so grateful to the NASPA team, including Abby, who's on the call, for helping us set up a virtual engagement with you all. My name is Elizabeth Hammond. My pronouns are she, her. I am the program coordinator for diversity and inclusion at Davidson College, and I currently serve as the co-chair for conference special events in the Student Leadership Program's Knowledge Community. And I'll turn over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Kurtz, and I use pronouns she, her, hers, and I serve as the interim director for student involvement at NC State University, and I also serve as one of our co-chairs for special events, and I'm excited to be here with you. I am going to talk to you a little bit about how we're going to use the technology platform for today. We're using Ring Central, and we'll be in presentation mode during the duration of this meeting. So we'll ask you to please mute yourself if you're not sharing with the group. And for roundtable discussions, please unmute yourself as you share with the group and share out. When called back to the meeting after our roundtable discussion, please select the option to rejoin the meeting. And a big thank you to Abby for being here on the call with us today to help us navigate the platform. I'm going to let Abby talk to us a little bit about the chat feature.
Thank you. As I said, my name is Abby Vollmer. I serve as the Director of NASPA Advisory Services, pronouns she, her, hers. I just wanted to call attention, if you're not familiar with the Ring Central, which is powered by Zoom platform, if you hover on the meeting screen, it should drop the bar at the bottom to show the different features to navigate. That is where you mute and unmute, as well as can turn on or off your video feature as you choose. Also located down there is going to be the chat features, the icon that looks like a thought bubble. If you click on that feature, it will pull up the group chat. This will be live the entire time. I will help moderate the chat feature. The best way to navigate this during the meeting today would be to hover down to the bottom and see that there is a box that right now is probably marked everyone. If you click on that and click the drop down, you will see my name, Abby Vollmer. Select that and you can send a chat to me individually that says, I have a question or I have a comment. And then I can help communicate with the meeting coordinators to make sure that your questions or comments are integrated into the conversation today. Otherwise, if it is something for the greater good, you are also welcome to use the everyone chat feature. But to interject into the conversation, it's probably best to do the private chat to me, and we will get you navigated into the conversation as easily as possible. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Abby. So this year's conference special events team has engaged in the conference in some really exciting ways, and we're glad to provide 2 virtual events, even though we won't be in Austin together this year. So today, the SLPKC open meeting, and on Monday, April 6th, from 2:30 to 4 Eastern Standard Time, we'll be hosting the SLPKC Leadership Bootcamp to discuss ways to build a leadership program from the ground. You can find this information on our social media or on the NASPA Conference Virtual Highlights website. In our planning of this year's think tank, we decided to focus on the intersection of leadership programs and diversity, equity, and inclusion work. More specifically, we wanted to focus on the SALT model, which is social action, leadership, and transformation model. Today, we will hear from our amazing panelist, Dr. Hudson, and we'll break into roundtable discussions with some guiding questions. We will then move into our awards ceremony, hosted by our SLPKC co-chairs, Sean and Ivani, to highlight people and organizations who are providing exceptional models for student leadership programs. And at the end, we'll wrap up and finish with next steps to think about student leadership programs.
All right, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the mission of our SLPKC organization. The mission is to serve as a resource for higher education professionals who have a professional interest in leadership, training, education, and development. The community is here to share best practices, provide critical evaluation of the field, examine standards of leadership programs, and support national and regional efforts to develop student leadership programs. We want to make contributions to literature, recognize extraordinary programs, and cultivate a forum to present on new ideas. We have a couple strategic goals. One is to create and share best practices and knowledge. Another is to increase engagement with general members. And lastly, to increase accessibility and connectedness for our regional reps. We do have a couple signature initiatives. We have NASPA SLPKC Leadership Podcast, and our SLPKC Graduate Student Mentor Program that you can see at the NASPA annual conferences. A few resources that we have for you. You might find helpful for student leadership program resources on our website. And you're probably thinking about how you can get involved with us. And at the end of this presentation, we'll share more ways to continue involvement with the KC and how to engage with us.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Next, we wanted to provide the opportunity for people who were on the SLPKC who are here with us today. So we first wanted to provide the opportunity for Sean and Avani to introduce themselves. Did Sean make it on the call?
I made it.
Yes, great.
The link was not working. I had no idea what was wrong.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm glad you made it in.
Me too. So I guess I will go first. I'll turn my camera here real quick. My name is Sean Ryan. I'm the outgoing co-chair for the SLPKC with Avani. We've been around for a couple years now. I'm excited to see all the great work that the KC will do in the years coming. And also a big shout out to our team for being able to move everything online after everything that's going on. So you'll hear from us a little bit more later with some award stuff, but good to see you all virtually.
Thanks.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Avani Rana. I'm the Director of Leadership Programs. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm currently the Director of Leadership Programs at the College of New Jersey. Happy to be passing the torch on, sadly, bittersweetly, passing the torch on to Heather and Rachel as we step off of our roles. But we'll be moving into new roles within the KC to help and assist in any way that we possibly can.
Awesome. Thanks, Avani and Sean. And we'll turn it to our incoming co-chairs, Rachel and Heather, if you'd like to introduce yourselves.
Hello, my name is Heather Brake. I serve as the Director of Student Conduct at Arkansas State University. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am one of the incoming co-chairs.
Hi, and I'm Rachel Winters. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I currently serve as the Director of Student Leadership and Community Engagement at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And I will be working with Heather this year as a co-chair for the KC.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather and Rachel. And we'd like to turn it over to people who are on the new SLPKC leadership team. If you want to introduce yourself with your name, pronouns, institution, and what's your position on the SLPKC leadership team. I know I saw a couple of folks.
My name is Megan Kelty. I work as the Director of Student Leadership and Involvement at the New School in New York City, and I serve it on the SLPKC as part of the pre-con team.
Megan.
And hey, I'm John Mark Day. Excuse me. I'm the Director of Leadership and Campus Life at Oklahoma State University, and I serve as the host of the podcast for the SLPKC.
Thanks, John Mark.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nadia Campbell. I serve as the Assistant Director for Leadership and Community Engagement at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I currently serve as the Communications Liaison for the Communications team on the SLPKC.
Awesome. Thanks, Nadia.
I'll go. Hi, my name is Christine Hernandez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm with Whittier College, and I am one of the awards co-chairs.
Awesome. Thanks, Christine. I think we've got a few more. All right. Well, thank you to everyone for being here. We're super excited to have the opportunity to connect today. So happy to have folks who are on our leadership team and then also members of the KC. So super excited to engage with you all today. And I'll turn it over to Michelle for panelist introductions.
Yes, so we're very excited to introduce our panelists today for the think tank. We appreciate your time and willingness to share your expertise around the intersection of DEI work and leadership programs around the SALT model. I'd like to provide a little bit of background before we get started. So unfortunately, Dr. Guthrie was unable to join us today, so we're sending our best to her as she takes care of some personal matters, but we do have a spotlight panelist here with us, Dr. Nicholas Hudson. Dr. Nicholas Hudson uses he, him, his pronouns and currently serves as the Director of Student Orientation, Leadership, and Engagement at Texas A&M International University, a Hispanic serving institution with 95% Latinx population situated on a U.S.-Mexico border in Texas. Nicholas's portfolio includes new and transfer student orientation, leadership programs, spirit and traditions, fraternity and sorority life, campus activities, and co-curricular engagement. Nicholas previously held positions at Washington State University and George Washington University, working with a variety of areas, including leadership development, student organizations, resident life, academic affairs, and sorority and fraternity life. Prior to entering into student affairs, Nicholas served as the director of a mentoring and tutoring program for Latinx youth in Northern Virginia. The son of an undocumented Mexican immigrant and U.S. citizen, Nicholas has utilized his lived history to shape his research and advocacy. Nicholas has researched with a Latin lens how undocumented Latino student activists have utilized funds for knowledge and other resources to bend the structures they face in pursuit of their educational goals. His research focuses on undocumented Latino student activism, Latino student success, storytelling and asset-based advising techniques, funds of knowledge, collegiate social movements, and multicultural Greek communities. He has authored several articles, including Strengthening Multicultural Greek Communities, Best Practices Working with and for Undocumented Students, and Utilizing Funds of Knowledge and Community Culture Wealth at the Center of Advertisement Strategies. Nicholas has taught social justice undergraduate courses and has led trips abroad studying social movements in Argentina. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Dr. Hudson, for joining us today. Next, I'd like to introduce the topic and provide a framing for the think tank today. The SLPKC conference team as a whole met at last year's conference and had conversations around what topics they wanted to focus on this upcoming year. We were curious, what topics are relevant and important to our colleagues in student leadership programs work? From this conversation, we decided to focus on the importance of intersections of identities in relation to student leadership programs and the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion work with student leadership programs. Some of our leadership team had just attended an educational session on the social action, transformation, and leadership model, or the SALT model, and suggested this as a framework for this year's think tank program. The SALT model was published in 2017 by authors in the National Institute for Transformation and Equity and the National Center for Institutional Diversity at the University of Michigan. The SALT model introduction reads, Introducing a new leadership framework that accounts for systemic oppression, power and privilege, and culture and identity. The SALT model denotes an explicit focus on leadership that is socially conscious and facilitates transformation to achieve justice. To capture the overall purpose of the SALT model, I'd like to share a quote from their work. It has never been more important for society to cultivate leaders who are able to understand these systemic contexts and play critical roles in advancing the well-being of all populations, especially those from underserved and historically marginalized communities. Authors of the SALT model examined each core element of the social change model, comparing it with other existing leadership frameworks and research related to issues of power and privilege, oppression, culture, and identity. This process resulted in an alternative set of elements that are different from the values embedded within the social change model and more explicitly account for the aforementioned systemic realities. These elements include capacity for empathy, critical consciousness, commitment to justice, equity and purpose, value of collection action, controversy with courage, and coalescence. We'll divide into elements in our roundtable discussions later, but now I'll turn it over to Michelle to facilitate questions we have for our panelists.
Yes, so I will start off with asking some questions to our panelists, and then we'll provide all of our attendees with some time to ask questions. So our first question is, how do you see the intersection of leadership programs in diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the work that you do?
That's a great question here, Michelle. And I think, our campus is quite different than many of y'all's campuses, right? So we're located here on the US-Mexico border, and our student population is 95% Latinx, and we're about 98% students of color. And so our the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion are constantly on our mind and the minds of our students in their lived experiences. And so I just think in general, it's something that's always at the forefront. But before we begin a little bit further, I'd also just like to say thank y'all for inviting me to come in and speak with you and really share some of the thoughts that we have here as the one of the largest HSIs with a Hispanic, percentage-wise of a Hispanic serving institution. So, I think part of what we do is we try to weave it into every one of our leadership programs. Like many campuses that exist throughout the country, we have what are known as tiered leadership programs, programs for our freshmen, our sophomore, and our junior and senior students. And literally this is this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion are woven in to help our students really learn how to utilize their funds of knowledge that they have had with them. And funds of knowledge is really a K-12 term that refers to the resources, lived histories, experiences that really go undervalued in a traditional educational setting. It was created this concept was created by Luis Moll at the University of Arizona. And it really reframes and situates students of color and predominantly Latinx students in what they've learned in their homes and how can they then utilize it as a place of an asset in their everyday to-day lives in an educational setting. So we put it through this concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion into every one of our leadership programs. All of our leadership programs focus on Juana Borda's The Power of Latino Leadership, which really discusses the 10 characteristics of leadership for Latinx students. And so all of our programs also are focused on social justice and global citizenship. And I think those concepts also are woven in. We're an international university where we have programs and students, as most of y'all do, internationally, but we're actually as we're situated here right on the US-Mexico border, we have a lot of programs that are geared towards international relations and trade, things of that nature. And so we try to help our students look at things in a larger level. A lot of our programs are teamed up with faculty members as mentors as they begin researching some of the underlying root causes, so to speak, of issues that exist. And so I do think that no matter what we do, we have an obligation as student affairs professionals and leadership folks across the country to actually weave into our leadership programs these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just weave them in, but really lay them as the centralized point of it. And being mindful that as the demographics change in the US, many, many more students of color, predominantly Latinx students, will be entering our institutions of higher education. The traditional leadership theories that exist that we've historically utilized as well are not necessarily built for the lived histories, the experiences of students of color and Latinx students in particular. And so we've done a very intentional job of looking for some curricular components that really augment their lived experiences, their histories, and really help them as they enter into the workforce. And that's really what we try to do. So.
Thank you. So our next question is, what support have you needed to intersect leadership programs and DEI work?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. We are a system school, so here at Texas A&M International University, we're part of the A&M system of 11 institutions throughout the state of Texas. And so we, because of our demographics and because of our just where we're situated, we don't have some of the typical resources that other campuses may come to rely on. For example, we don't have an Office of Multicultural Affairs or Multicultural Student Support Services or an LGBT center, things of that nature. And so we really try to build it within our office. And I think that's really, we've utilized our own resources, our own kind of network that we have. However, we have been very successful in weaving this concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion into our leadership programs with our connection with our Office of International Engagement, our Office of Equity and Diversity. And so, they have been really instrumental in helping our students really, especially our leadership programs, be more focused on their strengths rather than their perceived deficits that they have. And at our institution, and I think this is quite different from others, we have a very strong relationship with our faculty. In fact, for 2 of our 4 large-scale leadership programs, we have faculty mentors. So the students that are in our sophomore leaders involved in change program, as well as our international leadership fellows program, they all work on change-making projects and research and really mapping the system. And they have faculty mentors. So there's 5 groups, 5 faculty mentors that are assigned, and they perform undergraduate research on the topics that they've selected to really begin to look at developing changes within our community related to systemic oppression or systemic inequities that may exist there. Here in our city, we're actually 98% Latino, Hispanic, and so that dramatically changes pretty much everything we do in terms of the service that we provide, as well as the looking and researching as it relates to the root causes or the change-making projects. They're all really focused on this lens of equity and inclusion, and all of our speakers that we have really try to relate to this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just here locally at our institution or in the city, but also, once again, as we're an international institution, globally. And so we bring in speakers from across the world focusing on issues. We use Oxfam's 7 elements of global citizenship as curricular pieces throughout our programs that really aid us. So this year we focused on specifically sustainability. So all of our programs as it relates to our leadership programs connect with sustainable development and diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we know that students, communities of color and lower income communities are often hit harder when it comes to sustainable development. The resources just aren't there, and they're often the folks that are impacted in lack of sustainable processes.
Thank you. Our next question is, what trends do you see in higher education of an overlap or intersection of leadership programs and DEI work?
Yeah, so that's a challenging question. And I think in general, we're seeing right now a larger shift in the field as it relates to leadership programs, right? We're seeing more and more focus with a critical lens on diversity, equity, and inclusion in this concept of social justice, that we're trying to not just make it a concept, we're actually trying to make sustainable change that exists in our programs. But I do see that the largest trend that I know that is there and that it will continue to be there is the demographic changes that will be happening on college campuses. And that conflict that will exist between students of color at a increased number attending our institution as compared with those that have historically had the privilege of attending post-secondary institutions. And so understanding that though the demographic changes that will exist have often necessitated a change in some of our leadership programs. And I think now that we see, newer theories, but also practices as it relates to leadership programs, where they do intersect both of them, I think that's one of the great reasons why we utilize the SALT model of leadership in our curriculum, and why we're seeing more models tailored to the specific needs of minoritized populations throughout the country. And I think because these programs have historically privileged, those that may identify as white, middle to upper class, that have historically entered into institutions of higher education, we're seeing that. There's been some work overall, I believe, and I don't consider myself an expert at all in the area of leadership programs, but we are seeing many, many more theories, practices that are tailored to the specific needs of students throughout the country. And I think that's really the trends that I'm seeing as we increase students of color, as we increase first generation college students, as we increase seeing lower income Pell eligible students at our institutions. The demographics are necessitating a change in the way in which we're engaging with our students. I think also in that same breath, the new generation is also changing the way in which our leadership programs and diversity, equity, and inclusion are actually framed up. In our office, we are in charge of orientation, and we have seen a very large change in the last 2 to 3 years as it relates to the type of students and what they're interested in, as it relates to leadership programs. I think like many folks across the country, we have a hard time recruiting students to our leadership programs. While we know that they may be beneficial to them and they're focused on these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what really helps us in that marketing and recruitment techniques to have students enter in is really this idea of service. I know that Gen Z is much more service-oriented and much more in tune to the needs of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we're seeing folks that are already well aware of these concepts, and if our programs don't have them, they are going to be like, well, why am I doing this? Why am I actually going to provide the time to do it? And I think coupled with that, because Gen Z has been very traumatized, not only by the housing collapse and the Great Recession in 2008 and 9, they're also going to be now very much traumatized by this experience right now. And so they're going to once again question, what is the need for leadership programs? How is this going to benefit me? How is this going to take my time to when I can be focusing on work because now my family's out of work, or things of that nature? And so we have to ensure that when we create our programs as student leadership programs, that we're knowledgeable about some of the financial components that exist there, because often we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion and just the identity basis, but really there's the socioeconomic component that exists as well, where some of our college, especially at our institution, a lot of our program participants are navigating being full-time students, full-time engaged students, and then as well having full-time jobs. And because we're predominantly a commuter school, they're also taking care of their siblings and taking care of other family household responsibilities. And so our leadership programs really have to be cognizant of their whole selves, right? And we've had this concept of, you know, showing up and being our authentic selves all the time. But I think for a lot of our students, that's just a lot that exists there. And I know that there'll be more trends to come, but at least that's what I've seen in the work that we do here. When I was at Washington State University as well, we saw a lot of this idea of wanting our programs to be more focused in on how is this going to benefit me? How is this going to benefit my career? And I'm only able to give a small amount of time, right, to the cause or whatever it may be. And so I need to be able to get the most out of it. And I think that's really been helped us as we've rethought our programs and really made that connection to diversity, equity, and inclusion is that we have to be cognizant of the programming. And so we really try to tailor it to their needs.
Thank you. And how do you use the SALT model, or how do you hope to use the SALT model in the work that you do?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so I also attended the session last year in Los Angeles, and I'm like, this is wonderful. And in the session, I'm texting my coordinator of leadership and saying, we are going to redo our, we were already planning on redoing our sophomore leaders involved in change, but I'm like, we are going to use this model because it really tied into what we were already trying to do. But now there was something there that we could actually say from a theoretical standpoint and from like a conceptual model. Now there's something that we can tie it into for, especially for assessment purposes, especially meeting the needs of our students. We've often found in our curricular pieces that everything that we've done really, while it's applicable to everyone, we have had a harder time helping our students understand how this model that was created 30, 40 years ago when we weren't even an institution, and that was created for predominantly white, upper middle class, heterosexual men in many cases, how do we then utilize, you know, these programs in that? So we've been very strategic in the last 3 or 4 years to try to move our programs into much more this diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And this last year, we've integrated it into our, as I said, our sophomore leaders involved in change program. So what they do is they look at, you know, they review it, right? And I think that's the important concept, that they have to go into it. But then they utilize, you know, the social change model of leadership, and they kind of compare and contrast it in many ways, and how is it different? And then they look at the SALT model and say, okay, so if this is the model that fits better to your needs, your interests, your lived history and experience, how do we go about utilizing this as a place of change, right? So how do we get our local community, because our sophomores focus on our city, how do we get our city leaders to focus in on some of these large scale issues? And so they begin looking at, as I said, this year, sustainable development. So each group takes a component of sustainable development and really tries to begin researching it through this lens of, you know, the social action, leadership, and transformation model. So the SALT model. So they really try to look through that and making the a systems map. And so systems mapping is very important into what we do, to say, like, to identify what are the gaps in service, what are the gaps already in place. And so, you know, a lot of times our students come up like, this is the problem and this is the solution, right? And so they're very creative on solutions, but they haven't even done the initial research to see, like, what is already in place, and then what are some of the underlying reasons why those systems may not be in place, right? And so I think really that's how we utilize the SALT model for our sophomores, is to say, okay, so why do we think that there's not these programs? What type of systemic levels are there inhibiting the success of Latinx people by their own Latinx leaders, right? And so we think about it, right? All of our leaders are Hispanic, identify as Hispanic, Latino in our community. And so why are some of those systems that traditionally should be working for the people, not actually working for the people? And how are these systemic barriers in place? You know, there's this saying that I often agree with: skin folk aren't our kinfolk, and so aren't always our kinfolk. And so, and our students actually really buy into that. It's like, okay, so now I'm going to think critically of, like, yeah, we have this recycling program here in our city, but come to find out, the contract was not being held responsible to. So they did some research and things of that nature, and all of the recycling was going to the landfill. And so holding leaders accountable for areas of sustainable development. Why is our city one of the more polluted areas of the Rio Grande Valley? And so things of that nature as it relates to, we're in a shale. I'm not 100% for sure on that, but we've really looked into like energy, and we have a lot of oil and gas production in our area. And so how does that pollute ourselves? Really, that helped this year. We had a water crisis earlier this year in our city where our water wasn't drinkable. And so how do we work with our students to really look at, okay, this is what the city is supposed to provide you. These are the people that are supposed to be working for you, and yet you're not getting what you should be having. What levels of systemic oppression are in place, right, that are keeping the folks that have power in power? The water crisis only predominantly impacted our lower income communities here in our city. And so why is that the case, right? Why are the adequate resources not there? We also utilize the SALT model of leadership in our Leadership TAMU program, which is for our advanced students, so our juniors, seniors, and graduate students. And so in this one, we really teach them how to be an activist. And we utilize this as one of the underlying components of the curricular pieces. So we utilize Juana Bordas, all 10 elements of Latino leadership, but we also utilize this to kind of evaluate what can you do. And so it's really this concept of coalescence, right? So if we think about the three bubbles, really now we're looking at what can you do? Why are these things in place? And how do you get out there on the front lines and take everything that you've learned as a leader and put it now into practice? How do you develop action plans to engage in activities that will inevitably lead to social change that they're trying to achieve? And so it's a good combination of, I think we've made a balance in the social change model of leadership and putting together the SALT model with it. And so, yeah, so that's kind of how we incorporate it here. We're still in the first year because this is a brand new model. I'm sure we'll begin to utilize it as we move forward.
That's great. My last question before we move on to question and answer is, what do you gain most from using the SALT model framework?
I think part of it is this development of a critical consciousness. And so, prior to me coming in and always hearing one's bio is always just a little bit embarrassing, right? So it's the normal standard bio that I send to everything. And I said, edit it for your usage. But, I've come from George Washington University in DC. I've worked with Latinx students in Virginia. Come from Oregon and Wisconsin myself, and was in New York City. The students and Latinx students all throughout the country all have different lived experiences, different histories, and that is so much more true here in the Rio Grande Valley. And so understanding that our students, while we are a Hispanic serving institution, we are 95-96% Latinx, and our city's 98% Latinx, we still have a lot of issues. And so a lot of our students don't think on a day-to-day basis in the terms of equity and inclusion, right, in our city. It's because most of them have never left our city. And so they wouldn't know what it is like to experience the different levels and layers of oppression. In fact, sometimes in our area, in our city, in our high schools, even here at our institution, we have folks engaging in oppressive behavior, right? And so helping them understand how their actions may be impacting others, right? And so I think that's always part of our jobs as student affairs professionals, but helping them understand, like, these are some of the first concepts that they've ever learned all the way through their K-12 education. They've never really developed a critical consciousness about their identity, and how can their identity be used as an asset once they do leave the city, right? And so, our hope, my hope, our entire university's hope is that they will take what they learned here at TAMU and go out and spread it, right? And learn, and then so leave our city and then come back and bring what they learned from outside of the city back to us. And so that idea of critical consciousness, many of them have never thought of, how their actions may actually be microaggressions, how their actions may end up being, to an extent, oppressive. One of the, and I'll throw this out there, it's just an anecdotal piece, but, our sheriff, who is the brother of our congressman, their entire family is in leadership in our county and city and region. The Halloween hosted a Halloween costume party for an adult special needs facility. And in that, one of the folks was wearing blackface, dressed up as Aunt Jemima. And our sheriff was perfectly fine taking a photo with that individual and standing his ground, so to speak, as it relates to why that individual was allowed to wear blackface. And so, as I say, this concept of skin folk aren't necessarily our kinfolk, it runs true. And so helping our students really look through the lens of like, okay, so let's look what our elected officials are doing and how they're doing it. We're not saying it's, we're not having a political stance as it relates to it, whether or not they should vote for candidates, but we're saying, how do folks' actions, those in our leaders, how does that impact what we do? And so this idea of critical consciousness, of just awakening this idea of what's happening around them and getting them into this thought process to really analyze the actions of officials. Now, in that, though, you have to think about who we are as an individuals. As a Latinx individual myself, and all of our students Latinx, authority really plays a large role in that. And so we are taught as we're growing up to not question authority in many ways, and to respect our elders. And so teaching them this concept of respecting our elders also means that you can question them respectfully, question their actions and question their motivations, right? And so we've really tried hard to teach them these concepts as it will ultimately benefit them as they move through their personal, professional lives, to be able to not just accept this, what is provided to them. And I really think the SALT model, by providing that critical consciousness, and really just looking at everything that's around there and reframing one's identity as a place of, as an asset rather than a deficit, and creating that narrative is really important. And so I think that's what we gain the most, especially at our institution, for the SALT model usage.
Thank you so much. And now we will move on to some question and answers from everyone who's joined us today. So you're welcome to ask your question in the chat box. And there's also the option where you can unmute yourself to ask those questions. And Abby will be here to help us kind of navigate question and answers as well. So let's see what we have.
Sorry, still getting used to the microphone. My name is Nadine Steckline, and I am in Walla Walla, Washington, so not too far from Oregon. I can see Oregon pretty close. I had a question that I typed up. Oh, how can we access more materials or information about the SALT model? Is there like a website? Is there literature? I'm sure if I Google SALT, I could find it, but where do you get your information from?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so for everyone, it's publicly available. There's a brief available, and it's from the University of Michigan is where they really did this study, the National Center for Institutional Diversity and the National Institute for Transformation and Equity. And so it's available. It's about a 9-page document that lists all of it out. You could easily Google it. And I can also try to see if we can put it in the chat box, a link for it as well.
Thank you, Dr. Hudson. Great question. Do we have questions coming in on the chat box?
I had another question if there aren't any.
Absolutely.
How do you ensure equity when translating these programs online with us doing that pivot to online? How do we make sure that our student programs are equitable, with technology and our students having that kind of access?
Yeah, I think everyone's trying to figure that answer out, Nadine, especially in Walla Walla, Washington. I actually worked up at Washington State in Pullman.
Okay.
So I think that there's this concept of equity, right? Not everyone has internet at home, and not everyone has the capacity to do things. And I think we're all trying to navigate through that. One of the things that we do for us is most of our students have cell phones, and in fact, almost all of them have cell phones now. And so we make available, especially now that we're still in the middle of our programs for sophomore leaders involved in change. They're presenting at their showcase here on April 17th, all the research that they've done and the systems mapping that have taken place. So they've what they're going ahead and doing is a lot of the programs that we're doing in the facilitation has already been conducted online. So we were able to seamlessly transition it to it. So we do it through Blackboard Collaborate, which they're already used to. And so I think in many ways we've been fortunate with that. For those that are visually, that have different ability statuses, we utilize, our institution's been very compliant, I guess, in that way, and utilizing our resources to ensure that students that are visually impaired have resources towards it, and we close caption everything. And so from that equity standpoint, so from a socioeconomic standpoint, we look at it of trying to do things that in a virtual setting with their phones, things of that nature. And sometimes it's not that equitable, even as many times as we try to ensure that folks have access to what we have. Especially in our city, when we look at our city here in Laredo, not everyone has the greatest of cell phone service. And so, we're not as rural as Walla Walla, but we are rural in the sense that some of our folks that aren't from our city live on ranchos, right? And so they live on ranches that don't have great internet access. And so we still invite them to participate. And so we do things through the telephone. Our institution has been somewhat helpful in providing resources to check out, laptops, things of that nature. But we're also in the state of Texas, and our institution's open, and so open for business. Even though our city has a stay-at-home, stay safe, work order, what have you, if students need to come to campus to utilize our computers or labs, things of that nature, as long as they maintain 6 feet away from each other and only have 10 people in a room, they are more than happy to come to, because all state agencies in the state of Texas are deemed essential. And so our governor has told us that we will be providing those services to students.
Awesome, thank you.
So there's a question here that says, interested in learning about if we utilize mentors in our leadership development programs, that sources it. And so we do not, but I think this is to everyone as well. We don't use mentors. We use faculty mentors in that components, but we don't use peer mentors. We're not at that capacity yet.
Thank you. Great
Hi,
question.
this is Rachel Winters. We do use peer mentors in our leadership development programs. As far as demonstrating and disseminating information, we have a training in the summer where, so our program is about 60-ish first year students, and we also have, this year we had 14 mentors that were either sophomores, juniors, or seniors. So we met with them to do a training over the summer and broke out the topics. We use the social change model, which we're going to convert it to the SALT model eventually. So it would still fit with the same type of model, but they pick one of the topics and will actually facilitate that session. So this is all facilitated by the students that actually do the program. And that's how we use our peer mentors. They also get assigned about 3 to 4 of the first years. And then they check in with them. We have a calendar of concern for incoming students, and they check in with them weekly on some of those topics, as well as the content of the program.
Thanks for sharing, Rachel. Are there other questions in the chat box?
We do have some, and if you are next up, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Got it. Hi, my name is Elena Peters. I use she, her pronouns as well. My question, which I wrote out, was what are ways we can develop critical consciousness among students who maybe have never been exposed to concepts of identity, power, and privilege, oppression before? Kind of like a second part to that is like, is it sometimes necessary to build up to the SALT model instead of starting a program with it, given students' past experiences or knowledge?
So I absolutely agree with you. And so that's why we intentionally do not place it in our first year program. We incorporate some, so we have peer leaders, or we call them leadership ambassadors for our first year program that has 60 students, and we have 5 leadership ambassadors. We just cover some basic concepts of social identities and really begin to touch into concepts of power, privilege, oppression. We really model it after the teaching for social justice, right? So with that, then from there we begin the second year and our third program with really entering in there. I don't know if a traditional leadership program, and this is me and this is my own thought process, I don't know if we could start there because most of our students in our leadership programs may not have a marginalized or minoritized background and may not have ever had experiences, discussions as it relates to systemic oppression, things of that nature. Now, if we were to develop a leadership program that was first geared towards specifically students of color, I think that would be ideal to begin talking about the SALT model specifically for, our Latinx students or Asian American students or our African American Black students, right? Like that would be different, right? Because of their lived histories, their lived experiences. But if we're just having a generalized leadership program that's open to everyone, I think for me, I would scaffold it and start the first year, if you have it that way, scaffold it until they can even have conversations around it, because there'll be a lot of resistance. I know that in Washington State, when I taught my social justice leadership programs, we couldn't teach first year students these concepts. And so we would, the concepts that were there in SALT, right? Like they first have to even get a basic understanding of like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of this before. And really understand how my identity and the actions that I've taken have really impacted others. And so we saw success at Washington State when we began utilizing it with our second and third year programs. But I'm going to let other folks also answer that.
Do we have anyone from our leadership team that would like to add on anything else? Okay, we can move to our next question then.
I think that's me again. Sorry. I was just interested to see if anyone incorporates, it doesn't have to be called code switching in their leadership programs, but I'm interested to see if folks utilize that or talk about it in any way so that students know the importance and what it means.
We do not here at Tammy U. You know, we Washington State, we utilize, and I'm drawing a blank on the book's name, but we didn't.
Is it Fish Out of Water?
No, I'm drawing a blank. It wasn't code switching, but it was a book. Why am I drawing a blank? It's been a few years since I've taught it. But it's this concept as well. So we did utilize that as one of the texts that we did, but it was more for our social justice and intercultural leadership programs. We did utilize it, but I'm going to have to draw a blank on, quickly look and scan my bookshelf here in my office. But it's called Covering by Kenji. Kenji Yoshino. And so this book, it's called Covering by Kenji Yoshino. It actually gets into this concept of covering one's identity or code switching, a version of it, as he navigated his way through law school and things of that nature. And so we utilize this as one of the texts in our social justice leadership program, or social justice leadership course, excuse me, at Washington State.
Thank you. I haven't heard of that one. I've only read Fish Out of Water. It's a really good one.
All right, do we have any more questions before we move on to our breakout sessions?
I do have another one if no one else does.
Sure thing.
Awesome. So I am an emerging professional, actually just completing like grad school soon. And so I'm wondering, so I know like there's a lot of institutions that frame their leadership programs in the social change model right now. And obviously, I think the SALT model does a really good job of critiquing and highlighting all the issues with the social change model. So like, what experiences have you had with getting an institution to shift from social change to SALT model? And like, what recommendations might you have for someone who hasn't really gotten like leverage enough to do that like at an institution yet?
Oof. That's a challenging question, and so thank you to challenge us here on this Friday. You know, I think I won't speak for other folks. I've had an easy time doing it because while I'm in charge of the leadership curriculum here in our office, and so I think, you know, that's where it just becomes a little bit easier to do. You know, I think one of the techniques that I would look at is really framing it up of how the social change model of leadership really, it does not fit the narratives of all of our students that we serve, right? And so if we're trying to serve more students, especially those from minoritized backgrounds, we the SALT model, and maybe using them in conjunction with each other, will be able to help them realize that, hey, you know, the SALT model builds upon some of the concepts, but really reframes it in terms of the lenses that our students of color and other minoritized populations need to have. At least that's how I may frame it up, to say like, they're not complementary because they're quite different, but they could be used there to help students look through different lenses depending on how they may view the world and some of their lived histories. That could be an alternative, but I'm going to let other folks kind of chime in there of what they think.
So it looks like we've got some people thinking and reflecting. So this will be a great opportunity for you to continue some of those conversations and reflections in your small groups. I'm going to turn it over to Liz to give an overview of what our breakouts will look like. And just remember, we've got some exciting awards that we'll be giving out at the end of this. So you have a lot of exciting, engaging things coming up.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. And thank you, Dr. Hudson, for your time, your willingness to not only be with us at the conference, but then moving virtually as well. Your experience that you shared. I know myself, I've learned a lot today, and from the additional questions from folks who are participating. Thank you. And I just, to say, appreciate the vulnerability in this conversation of these are things that I'm grappling with where, what are my needs for leadership programs. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's been engaged with this. So we'll move to roundtable discussions. Abby, are you ready, before I give kind of context, are you ready to break out people into groups?
Yes, as soon as you are ready and have instructions out, I will break out facilitators and then just randomly assign participants in the meeting to the 5 breakout spaces.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. So we wanted to break up, when we were thinking about the conference and breaking out into roundtables, we were thinking about focusing on individual elements. So as you think about in your conversations, these are just suggestions for questions to think about. But if your group really just has other things they want to talk about around the STOP model, feel free to do that too. And also the elements are up to you all. We have just kind of general breakouts for each of the elements, but if another one is piquing your interest, feel free to move forward that way too. So we have a couple of questions to think about. The first one, what do you identify with within the element as a student affairs professional? So that's within the element of your room. And then what have you seen students identify within that element? So thinking about yourself as a student affairs professional, but then also the students that you work with. So I'll be in one room with the first 2 elements. Michelle will be in a room for element 3, which is community to justice. Rachel will be in a room, which is that 4th element, equity and purpose. Heather Brake will be the value of collective action with element 5. And then Dr. Hudson will be that last element 7, coalescence. So if everyone's ready, we can go ahead and break out into those groups. And we'll take about, We'll take about 15 minutes for these discussions, and then we'll come back and share out as a larger group of things that you all talked about for about 10 minutes. So take the next 15 minutes to dive into those elements or other options that you wanted to discuss. All right. I think, are we already in a group? Let's see.
Hi, Liz. I'm gonna have to skip the breakout room just because my 10-month-old just woke up from a nap.
Oh, sure thing.
Yeah, but I'll join if I can in a little bit.
Oh, great. Thanks, Taylor. All right. Abby, are you in this group with us?
I am.
Okay, great. So we're in a group. Awesome. So hello, everyone. It looks like there are about 8 or 9 of us together. So let me actually, I'm going to exit. Oh, I just saw the invitation. I'm sorry. I didn't see that I was in presentation mode. So I'm going to pull up the SALT model and share that.
like examples of it that are a little bit more anonymous, of like, here's what it's looking like on our campus, whether it's negative or positive, and here's how we solved it, or here's what we wish we would have done.
Yeah.
I think going back to your original question, Michelle, about the commitment to justice, I think being able to balance what that justice looks like, right? Mm-hmm. So how the motivation to advance, but how do we balance those things with time and pressure? Navigating multiple priorities that students have and being able to kind of have them narrow down what that focus might
kind of really key, and just coming from my own personal experience, what I have found important. And so I think finding new ways to connect with our students in order to build that capacity, and what is that going to look like as higher ed shifts and changes, and kind of what this world is going to look like in the next year, because I'd imagine it's going to be different. And how do we do it in a way that's responsible, and adapt, is empathetic to their own needs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Michelle, I hate to interrupt. I just want to let you know that some of the breakout rooms have disbanded. And so if you want to let me know when to make the call to close all the breakout rooms.
Okay. Let me double check with Liz.
Okay, perfect. I will just stay here, and then you let me know, because then I have to go back out and make the all call from the main screen.
Sounds good. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. So it looks like we've got some takeaways, and that's something that we'll probably share in the larger groups, and then maybe some self-work. I like staying on that topic of self-work. So as we're thinking about the next couple months, maybe what's one homework assignment or training or development area that we'd all want to take a look into for ourselves as we continue to grow as professionals in leadership programs?
I think personally reading up more on this and doing, I like reading the citations. I'm like getting a little bit deeper on it. I'm looking at the Michigan document, and I think this actually goes in line with a lot of the work that our student life cluster has been doing. And so seeing if we can facilitate some type of discussion amongst our colleagues. So I think, yeah, I want to kind of talk it out with them just to see like, okay, what they're thinking in terms of the model, or where we're seeing kind of the connecting pieces.
What are you thinking, Christopher?
To be honest,
States Center maybe like 3 years ago. That like I feel like also draws kind of upon some of the base knowledge within social change, but then kind of takes it steps out in similarly to this thinks about like identity in societal structures and things like that.
That's helpful.
Liz, I apologize for the interjection. I'm just hopping between breakout rooms, and I checked with Michelle, and she wanted to confirm we have a couple breakouts who have released and are just waiting in the main meeting space. And so she wanted to see when you wanted to call all of the meetings back.
I think now is perfect. I think that was about 15 minutes. That's perfect.
Okay, perfect. I will leave this individual breakout, and then I will do an all call for everybody to rejoin the main meeting.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank All right. Has everyone joined the main group, we think?
I think we're slowly entering in, Liz. I see a bunch of numbers. I see the numbers like rising. So.
Oh, great. Thank you. Oh, perfect. Now I can see.
Liz, everybody should be back in the main meeting.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Thanks for your help on that. So we'll take the next 10 minutes or so to share out with the larger groups. So we'd love to hear from groups. What did you all talk about? What's some brief feedback that you wanted to provide the larger group?
Well, this is Stacy. I can talk, and we talked about this might be a good topic for a podcast, and also we were interested in Dr. Komaves and her interpretation of the SALT model and relationship between the social change model, SALT model, and any practical applications on infusing both models on a college campus if they are currently a social change model school.
Thanks, Stacy. Other rooms that would like to share?
I can share for group 3. We were discussing the model as a whole, but we also dug into equity and purpose. A couple of the things that we brought up were it really helped think about which voices we're centering around and which lenses we're making more normalized and that we're building off of. Another thing we discussed was specifically around language and how it shifts from using common and how the word common can have some other norms and things associated with it as far as maybe the dominant narratives. So it's helpful to critically think about the terms and how we're engaging all student voices, or even just shifting the language we're using in our programs.
Wow, thank you.
I got to meet with Avani, Christopher, and Christine, and we started off talking about the commitment to justice. And some of the main takeaways we had were kind of balancing what justice looks like and thinking about time pressures that you might have, as well as kind of juggling different priorities. And something that really resonated for us was the notion of empowering our students. And then we also dipped into the value of collective action. So that was an exciting one that kind of went beyond our topic. But if anyone from my group would like to provide any additional notes or takeaways, you're welcome to.
Awesome.
I can talk about element 5, value of collective action. Our group really chatted about working through problems, like complex problems as a group, and sometimes not really wanting to participate on helping to work through a problem that maybe doesn't necessarily affect you, but you putting that aside and working for that overall group, and not trying to rush through that. And maybe sometimes as professionals that we need to admit that, hey, we need some time on this. Like we tend to have a lot of pride and want to, in some ways, just get things done. We also talked about how great it is to see our students work together for the whole. And when that happens, like just how beautiful it is to watch that occur.
It's great. Other thoughts? I think element 7, did anyone want to share from that group?
Well, I'll go ahead and share out a little bit. We talked about element 6 and 7 of the here, and we talked a little bit really looking specifically at the controversy with courage, right? And so having the ability, if I'm not mistaken, Sean had talked about, like, we in the student affairs profession tend to be the ones that operate from that mentality a lot more than others do. And so how do we help our other colleagues in our institution wrestle with that ability? These concepts are probably some of the first ones they've ever heard. And Corbin also had talked a little bit about this, like, sometimes this doesn't happen from a student's perspective, especially perhaps in sorority and fraternity life. And so how do we do that and really then work towards this holistic change and coalescence that's there? We then shifted and pivoted to it. We thought, or at least I think, that it really relates to this idea of critical consciousness, of even beginning to have those conversations as it relates to understanding the different forms of and layers of oppression that may exist, whether they're individual, institutional, or societal, things of that nature, right? And so having those conversations is part of the social change model, not social change, but the SALT model, excuse me, with folks, right? Even we're challenging them with courage and saying, actually, I'm going to say that's actually not right, right? But I'm going to help educate you on it, right? And develop this critical consciousness that exists. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that X, Y, and Z may be related to those things. So yeah.
Great. It sounds like there were some really awesome conversations, and I'm glad that even though we are virtual, we still had a platform to break out into roundtable discussions. So thanks to Abby for breaking us up, and thanks for everyone for giving a general overview of what was talked about in your groups. We hope that this is just the beginning of the conversation of those of us in the room, that we are all in the work. So we hope this is just the beginning. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who has been engaged, asking questions, listening, whatever that looks like for you. We're glad that you could be a part of today's think tank. And now I will turn it over to Sean and Avani. I'll introduce our two phenomenal Student Leadership Programs community co-chairs. So Avani serves as the Director of Leadership at the College of New Jersey. Sean serves as the Associate Director of Fraternity Life and Experiential Leadership Education at Dickinson College. So I'll now turn it over to both of you to start our award ceremony.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Liz, and good job to everyone for you guys' previous discussion. I like the idea of learning about new models like this way, and I think this is something that I think could easily be applied here at Dickinson as well. So I'm excited. So I enjoy the conversation. So perfect. Well, we have some awards to hand out. Sad to say that we can't do it in person, but we'll do it through the virtual platform. We have a few awards to hand out, and so we'll go ahead and start with that first one. Is that cool, Vani? Or?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So our first one is the Outstanding Contribution to the Student Leadership Program Award. So the purpose of this award is to recognize a professional staff or faculty members' work at a campus level in the area of student leadership programs. Recipients of this award have made contributions above and beyond the assigned duties of their position and had a significant impact on student leadership programs at their institution. The 2019 Outstanding Contribution to Student Leadership Programs Award recipient is Carol Christensen at the University of Washington, Bothell. Carla has been extremely passionate about student leadership. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from Texas A&M before pursuing her Master's of Education in Higher Education at Loyola University, Chicago, where she served on the Multi-Institutional Study of Leadership Research team. Previously, she worked as the Assistant Director for Student Organizations at the University of San Francisco. There, Carla had the opportunity to work with an extremely engaged student body with a passion to advocate for social justice. Currently, she serves as the Assistant Director of Student Engagement Activities at the University of Washington, Bothell, where she gets to work and learn from passionate student club officers, as well as professionals and staff. Carla works to incorporate leadership program opportunities, which are grounded in leadership theory for the campus and many of her ongoing and recurring programs. So congratulations to Carla for this award.
So our next award is the Outstanding Service to the Student Leadership Programs KC Award. It is my honor, because I've gotten a chance to work with her pretty closely, to give the Outstanding Service to the Student Leadership Programs Knowledge Community Award, recognize the professional staff or faculty member work as a member of the SLPKC. Recipients have made significant contributions to the knowledge community through their service and leadership. So it's my honor to honor Christine Hernandez at Whittier College for this year's award. Christine Hernandez is dedicated to empowering others through opportunities in education and leadership. She currently serves as the Director of the Office of Student Engagement at Whittier College. As Director of the Office of Student Engagement, Christine provides leadership and support to co-curricular programs, including clubs and organizations, societies, student government, and the Campus Center. Prior to come to Whittier College, Christine served as the Associate Director for Women's Leadership, Civic Engagement, and Assessment at Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. She's also previously worked at the AAUW, which is the American Association of University Women, and at George Mason University. Christine holds a bachelor's degree in English from California State University Fullerton, a master's degree in higher education from UPenn, and a graduate certificate in nonprofit management from George Mason University. And it's been my pleasure to work with Christine, so congratulations, Christine Hernandez.
Congratulations. Our next one is the Outstanding Leadership Spotlight Program of the Year Award. I believe we have two for this category, so I will go ahead and do one, and then Avani will do the other. So the Outstanding Leadership Spotlight Program of the Year Award recognizes programs that are transforming higher education through best practices that should be recognized by the SLPKC. Past recipients have centered their recognized programs around student leadership topics such as research and assessment, influences on student learning, theory to practice, and much more. The first award of the 2020 Outstanding Leadership Spotlight Program of the Year Award goes to the Civil Rights Leadership Tour at Elon University. And then the other one is the Illinois Leadership Inventory at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which Avani will talk about after the Civil Rights Leadership Tour. The Isabel Cannon Leadership Fellows Program from Elon University takes a group of students through an experiential journey where they engage in deep learning about the civil rights movement. Throughout this important social movement, the Leadership Fellows gain leadership lessons around ways diverse groups of activities use the tactic of direct and nonviolent action to change and ultimately bring an end to the segregation in the United States. Our study of the civil rights movement was focused on leaders and events in 5 cities: Greensboro, Atlanta, Birmingham, Salem, and Montgomery. that they were the very center of the movement during the 1950s and the 1960s. After spending time studying these events, we visited these cities to see firsthand the movements that took place. The group also explores the impact of movement on these cities today and then applies the lessons learned to the emerging movements we find ourselves in today. The students visit various historic sites, including equal justice initiatives like Legacy Museum, the Center for Civil and Human Rights, the 16th Street Baptist Church, Edmonds Pence Bridge, and much more. They've also had the opportunity to meet with leaders during their tour, including city mayors, freedom riders, and our current day youth activists.
Their second award goes to the Illinois Leadership Inventory, or ILI. ILI is an online inventory that allows students to engage in self-reflective practice while evaluating their level of expertise in various leadership competency areas. The tool also serves as an assessment research tool to measure student leadership growth across time. The ILI is divided into 4 modules: personal, self, interpersonal and team, organization, and community society. Each module asks students to reflect on 4 to 6 leadership competencies in those areas. An example of that would be empathy, group dynamics, change management, innovation. Upon completing the assessment, users receive their results and a list of recommendations to further their learning, including academic classes, on-campus programs, and resources, i.e. podcasts, TED Talks, articles. These recommendations are tailored to the user's competency level and academic college. In total, the ILI has over 1,000 different recommendations for further leadership learning, and over 2,000 people have completed the assessment. Although the tool was designed for Illinois students based in the Illinois Model of Leadership, a limited version is publicly accessible on their website. So congratulations to these 2 amazing programs for their creative and innovative work in the area of leadership development. It is now our honor to turn it over to our new chairs for this upcoming year. So Sean and I just want to really emphasize the fact that we have had the pleasure of working with both Heather and Rachel as part of our role because they served on our leadership team. And we want to thank them for all the hard work that they've done as our second in commands in a lot of these different areas, and now taking over this role as co-chair. So thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And thank you so much to our outgoing leadership team that may be on the call today for all the hard work that they have done in supporting Sean and I in the work that we do, because we wouldn't have been able to do that work if it wasn't for all of you. Sean?
Yeah, 100% like to echo Vani's sentiments. I mean, for me, I've been involved in the KC ever since graduate school. So this KC specifically has been really my family as a professional. So it's kind of sad to be leaving this position, but they haven't got rid of us completely. But we know that the KC is going to be in good hands, and thank you for everything you all have done for us. The late night phone calls, text messages that are happening, trying to figure out what we're going to do next, especially in the middle of a snowstorm and things like that. Now COVID-19 with NASPA, so we couldn't have asked for more of a dedicated team. So thank you very much for the last 2 to 3 years. So, and we're excited to see the KC give us. So.
Great. So Heather and Rachel.
Thank you, Sean and Ivana. And congratulations to our awards recipients. Now, Michelle is going to talk about ways to get involved and stay involved with the SLPKC.
Alrighty, so if you are interested in joining the Student Leadership Knowledge Community, please email slpchairs@gmail.com. We have leadership positions available, which are located on Volunteer Central on the NASPA website. So please let us know if you have any questions about our open positions. To stay engaged and informed throughout the year, please follow us on our social media outlets on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And our communications team does an amazing job to communicate out what the SLPKC is doing throughout the year. So be sure to take a look out for those things.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. And we'll turn it over to Rachel to talk about the multi-institutional study of leadership.
Before I dig into the MSL, or multi-institutional study of leadership. I wanted to circle back around to the SALT model, and one of the initiatives that we're working on through the KC is to create a community of practice around this model for practitioners. So if you are interested in being a thought partner or a potential research partner in this model and thinking about how we're implementing this on campus, how we're assessing it, how we're putting all these things together, different activities, etc. If you'd like to be a part of that, I think we can either do the email that's listed here on this business card if you want to contact us to let us know that you'd like to be a part of that community of practice. We'll pull people together. We'll put some intentionality behind it first, but then we'll pull people together to think through what our work looks like around the SALT model more nationally. I think the aim would be to provide some sort of guidebook or framework for other practitioners who are interested in using this model. So I wanted to give that a little lip service before we jump into looking at the institutional study of leadership. So just as an overview, the MSL is an international research program focused on understanding the influences of higher ed in shaping socially responsible leadership, capacity, and other leadership-related outcomes, such as efficacy, cognitive skills, and resiliency. So beyond a research program, the MSL is an international movement towards more effective, evidence-based college student leadership development. The enrollment period is happening right now. If your institution would like to utilize the service, it is a paid service. I know that they focus specifically on the social change model. So students who are, or institutions who are using that, if they would like to have this study, they help organize the study on your campus, and then they give you comparative data across the nation. So if you're interested in that, their website is leadershipstudy.net. They also have general insights and published reports that are available if you're interested in some of their assessment reports that they've done nationwide. This group has been instrumental in helping us find some of the deficits for the social change model and thinking about diverse perspectives. So they've been a partner to us in the past, so I wanted to give them a shout out and talk about them a little bit before we conclude today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So we first wanted to take a moment to again thank our panelist, Dr. Hudson. Thank you so much for your time with us today, sharing how you've implemented the SALT model on your campus and your thoughts around the model in particular. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for everyone today sharing your own expertise and engaging around the topic. Very excited that the SLPKC will have further opportunities to engage in the SALT model. It's been an amazing opportunity that we've been able to be a part of providing to you all today virtually. So again, wanted to shout out Abby, our host, for being a part of the call today to help us out with navigating this new technology. I also wanted to shout out within NASPA's team, Nathan, Victoria, and Monica Nixon. They've been really helpful in helping us navigate moving things virtual. So thank you to both of them for making this possible. And then before we wrap up, we do have the SLPKC Leadership Bootcamp, which is the first of its kind, which Avani will be leading on Monday. And again, that's Monday, April 6th from 2:30 to 4 Eastern time. So you can find the link on the same website under April 6th with NASPA's highlights. So we hope you all have a wonderful day and keeping connected with us throughout the year. Enjoy your weekend and hope to see you at next year's conference.
Hi, everyone. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Christine. Good to see everybody.